He thought the coldest thing in Coldvale was the winter itself, but nothing prepared this former soldier. For the moment he opened the back door to the backyard and saw his 5-year-old daughter standing in a tub of ice water, clutching her shivering baby brother as their stepmother dumped an entire bucket of freezing ice over their tiny bodies. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, growled first, sensing the danger before Jack could even understand the horror unfolding in front of him. Why was a woman who once promised to heal a broken family now doing something no parent should ever witness? And what secret, buried under months of snow and silence, turned a warm home into a nightmare? What happens next will push a father to the edge and reveal the truth hidden in the cold. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe no child should ever suffer in silence, hit subscribe and share this story with someone who still believes in kindness. Coldvale, Wyoming, was a town wrapped in eternal winter, a place where even sound seemed to freeze mid-air and where grief could linger like frost on the glass. 8 months had passed since Haley, Jack Carter's wife, had slipped away after giving birth to their son. She had left behind a quiet house, a 5-year-old girl named Emily, who still asked why Mommy wasn't home, and an infant, Finn, who had never known warmth beyond the cradle of his father's trembling arms. Jack, 42, carried the weariness of both war and widowhood in his shoulders. His face bore the lines of someone who had spent too many nights awake, listening to silence that felt heavier than gunfire. Each morning, he pulled on his olive green coat, the same one he had worn through deployments overseas, and tried to be both soldier and father, steady, dependable, unbroken. Marilyn entered his life when the house still smelled faintly of Haley's lavender lotion. She came with soft words and patient smiles, a woman in her mid-30s whose beauty seemed gentle, whose hands knew exactly when to rest on his arm and when to lift the crying baby from his cradle. Jack mistook her calmness for compassion, her sympathy for strength. In his loneliness, it was easy to believe she cared for the children as deeply as he did. Emily began calling her Miss Marilyn at first, and within weeks, Mommy, though her voice trembled when she said it. Finn was too young to know the difference. His small fingers clutched whoever held him. To the neighbors, Marilyn appeared flawless, the young stepmother who saved a broken man from falling apart. While Jack took on longer shifts at the lumberyard, Marilyn remained at home with the children. From the outside, she was everything a family could need. She cooked warm stews, kept the fireplace burning, and smiled when visitors commented on how blessed Jack was to have found someone so devoted. Yet behind closed doors, the air inside the house began to change. Heavy, muffled, almost watchful. Emily, once talkative and full of stories about school, grew quieter. Her drawings changed too. Where she once drew suns and trees, she now drew cold blue houses and stick figures standing alone in the snow. When her teacher called Jack to say the little girl flinched at the mention of her stepmother's name, Jack brushed it off, convincing himself that grief still clouded his daughter's world. At night, Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at Haley's photograph framed above the mantel, Rex lying faithfully by his feet. Rex was a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and a black saddle marking across his back, his chest and legs a deep tan. The dog had served with Jack during his final year in the army. Loyal, alert, and quietly protective, the kind of companion who seemed to read human fear before it spoke. When Jack whispered to himself that things felt wrong, Rex's ears often twitched, as if he agreed. But a soldier's instinct sometimes conflicts with a widower's hope, and Jack still chose hope. That afternoon, the snow had started before noon and hadn't stopped since. By late day, a curtain of white blurred the streets and erased the edges of the world. Jack pulled into the driveway, his breath clouding the air as he stepped out, boots sinking into several inches of new snow. Rex jumped from the passenger seat, landing with the ease of an animal bred for storms. The house looked peaceful from a distance, the porch light faint through the flurries, smoke curling from the chimney. Jack thought, for a fleeting second, that maybe life was turning around. But as he reached the gate, Rex stiffened. The dog's amber eyes sharpened toward the backyard, his body tense, ears pricked forward. Then came the sound, faint but distinct, A baby's cry carried through the wind. Jack froze. It wasn't the steady wail of hunger. It was thin, weak, fading. Rex bolted before Jack could even call his name, bounding through the snow toward the back garden. Jack followed, his boots slipping on the ice, heart hammering against his ribs. The closer he came, the clearer the cries became, mixed with something else, a woman's voice, sharp and rhythmic, like someone scolding rather than soothing. He reached the back door, the hinges creaking as he swung it open. The sight inside would stay with him forever. Emily stood barefoot in a thin beige polka dot dress, her small body trembling violently, arms wrapped around baby Finn, who was pressed against her chest beneath a soaked blanket. They were both inside a large metal tub filled with ice water, steam rising faintly from their shivering bodies. Emily's lips were purple, her breath came in tiny gasps. Beside them stood Marilyn, her hair tied neatly back, her face devoid of emotion as she upended a metal bucket, sending another rush of ice cascading over the children. "They need to toughen up," she muttered, almost to herself. "Cold builds strength. It's good for them." For a moment, Jack couldn't move. His mind refused to connect the image before him with the woman he had trusted. Then, instinct took over. He lunged forward, scooping Emily and Finn from the freezing water. Emily clung to him, sobbing soundlessly, while Finn's tiny body hung limp against his shoulder. Rex positioned himself between Jack and Marilyn, growling low, teeth bared. The dog's breath steamed in the icy air, and for the first time since Haley's funeral, Jack felt a surge of pure, undiluted rage. He carried the children inside, the heat from the fireplace biting against their frozen skin. He wrapped them in blankets, whispering their names, pressing his palm against Finn's back, until he felt a faint heartbeat. Emily whimpered, her voice hoarse. "She said we have to be brave, Daddy. She said Mommy would want us strong." Jack's jaw tightened. He turned slowly as Marilyn entered, her arms folded, her tone calm, almost rational. "Finn gets sick so easily," she said softly, her eyes unblinking. "And Emily, too. I was only trying to build their immunity. That's what you do with weak ones. You train them to endure." The words hung in the air, cruelly logical in their madness. Jack stared at her, searching for some trace of remorse, but her face remained serene, her voice smooth. The warmth of the fire could not thaw the chill her presence left in the room. Behind him, Rex growled again, the sound low and steady, as if warning that this was not a misunderstanding but a revelation, a glimpse into something far darker than neglect. Jack said nothing for a long time. He simply held his children closer, feeling the weight of their fragile bodies and the trembling in Emily's hands. The snow outside thickened, pressing against the windows like an unspoken truth. Marilyn stood motionless near the doorway, the flicker of the flames painting her face in alternating shades of light and shadow. She smiled faintly, a gesture that might once have seemed gentle but now looked terrifyingly hollow. "You'll see," she whispered almost tenderly. "It's for their good." He didn't answer. The only sound in the room was the crackle of fire and Rex's slow, rumbling growl that seemed to echo the storm outside. Jack had seen cruelty in war, but never in his own home. And as the snow fell heavier across Coldvale, he realized that sometimes evil didn't come with noise or chaos. It came wearing warmth, speaking softly, and promising to help you heal. The morning after the storm rose gray and quiet, the kind of quiet that feels wrong, too heavy for the hour. Jack sat at the edge of the couch, the fire behind him reduced to embers, his two children still asleep in the room upstairs. The house had the strange calm of a battlefield after the noise had died, still, but not at peace. Marilyn moved through the kitchen, her steps soft and deliberate, the faint clink of glass and porcelain blending with the whisper of snow outside. Jack couldn't look at her without feeling the echo of the night before, her voice, the ice, the calm cruelty that had stolen warmth from everything it touched. He told himself he would watch, wait, and understand before he acted. But beneath that restraint, something inside him had already changed. Emily woke later, pale under her pink coat, her hair tangled into soft honey curls. She crawled into her father's lap, clutching her stuffed bear so tightly that its seams stretched. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice trembling as if afraid of being heard. "She puts me in the cold water, not just yesterday. Sometimes she locks me in the little freezer. She says if I tell you, she'll make Finn disappear." The words came out broken, uneven, like a secret torn from a wound. Jack's heart clenched. He could feel her shaking, her small body radiating fear rather than warmth. He held her close, forcing calm into his voice, though rage burned beneath it. He told her softly that no one would ever hurt her again. Upstairs, Rex paced before the nursery door, nails clicking against the floorboards as if he too understood the danger that lingered in the house. Later that morning, Jack poured Finn's milk and noticed something faint but unmistakable, a chemical scent, sharp and bitter beneath the usual sweetness. He hesitated, sniffed again, then turned toward Marilyn, who stood by the window watching the snow fall as though nothing in the world could trouble her. "Did you mix this?" he asked. She turned her head, her tone light, almost teasing. "Of course. You don't think I'd let a baby starve, do you?" He said nothing more, but as soon as she left the room, he poured the milk into the sink, his stomach twisting. The liquid left a faint oily sheen on the surface of the water before disappearing down the drain. He began to notice small things, things he might have missed before. Emily's favorite toy bear no longer made a sound when squeezed. When he opened it, the batteries were gone, the tiny wires cut clean. The small camera he had installed in the hallway to monitor Finn's crib had been unplugged. Even the baby monitor on his nightstand now hummed with static. Every device that could record or transmit sound had been silenced, methodically, as if someone had planned it. Jack realized he was being watched in his own house, not by eyes of love, but by eyes measuring control. That evening, when Marilyn stepped out for groceries, Jack searched her room. The air smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a strange mixture that made his skin crawl. Beneath the bed, hidden inside an envelope marked "Confidential," he found what he hadn't been prepared for, a stack of medical papers bearing her name, Marilyn H. Carter. The files were from a psychiatric facility in Idaho, detailing treatment for behavioral disorders, specifically concerning impulse control with minors. There were notes from doctors describing manipulation, emotional detachment, and an inability to perceive harm as harm. Jack's hands trembled as he turned the pages. The neat signatures and hospital seals made it all real in a way the night before hadn't. When Marilyn returned, snow dusting her hair, she looked radiant, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "You look tired," she said, placing groceries on the counter. "You should sleep early." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Jack stared at her longer than he meant to, long enough for her expression to tighten just slightly, a flicker of suspicion beneath the mask. "I'll be fine," he replied, his voice low. "You just make sure the children are, too." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway with Rex at his side, listening to every creak, every shifting board, every sound from behind the closed door where Marilyn slept. By morning, his decision was made. He drove into town, Finn bundled in the back seat, Emily asleep against Rex's fur. The police station sat across from the old post office, a squat brick building that looked as weary as the town itself. Inside, Sheriff Arthur Hale, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with thinning gray hair and the calm of someone used to dismissing panic, greeted him with polite familiarity. Hale had known Marilyn since her teenage years, a fact Jack hadn't thought much about before. As Jack began explaining, the ice, the fear, the files, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing not in disbelief but in weariness. "Jack," Hale said finally, "you've been through hell these past months. Losing Haley, adjusting to a new wife, raising 2 little ones. It's a lot for any man. Maybe you're seeing patterns that aren't there." Jack felt his throat tighten. "Are you saying I imagined my daughter standing in a tub of ice?" Hale's voice softened, but his gaze remained firm. "I'm saying grief does strange things. Marilyn is a good woman. I've known her since she was a kid. She helped her mother at the church for years. You can't just accuse her of abuse without proof." Jack wanted to slam his fist on the desk to make the man understand. But years of discipline held him back. He left the office with a hollow ache in his chest, the kind of ache soldiers feel when backup doesn't come. Outside, the snow fell harder. He opened the truck door, and Emily looked up at him from the seat, her eyes wide, silently asking if the nightmare was over. He couldn't answer her. He only reached for her hand, the small fingers fitting into his like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. That night, Marilyn hummed softly as she tucked Finn into his crib, the same melody she had used since the day she moved in, sweet, repetitive, lulling. Jack watched from the doorway, his face unreadable. The warmth in her voice no longer fooled him. It sounded like a tune rehearsed for an audience that had stopped believing. When she turned and met his gaze, she smiled faintly. "You should trust me, Jack," she said. "You've already lost one family. Don't lose another." He didn't respond. Rex sat beside him, ears raised, eyes fixed on her with the same unblinking vigilance as a sentry, guarding against something that pretended to be human. Night had swallowed Coldvale whole. The snow that once fell gently now tore across the valley like sheets of broken glass, carried by a wind that howled against the rooftops. Inside the dimly lit house, Jack Carter moved with silent precision, the kind of deliberate calm learned by soldiers who had once escaped fire and smoke. Finn slept pressed against his chest, his small body bundled tightly beneath layers of blankets. Emily stood by the door, her pink coat hastily buttoned, her breath coming in nervous clouds. Rex waited beside them, tail low, amber eyes locked on Jack, ready to follow wherever his master went. The plan was simple, to leave without sound, without hesitation, before Marilyn could twist the truth into something Law would believe. The truck sat idling in the driveway, its headlights off, a dim glow from the dashboard casting light across Jack's weary face. Every instinct told him to move quickly, but the memory of Sheriff Hale's disbelief still stung. He had gone to the law once, and it had sided with her. Now, the law itself might be her weapon. As he stepped into the cold, the night pressed against him with biting force, the kind that burned through gloves and fabric alike. Behind him, the house stood still, dark, calm, pretending innocence. He didn't look back. The moment the truck's wheels hit the road, he felt something shift in his chest, a mixture of guilt, anger, and the faintest breath of freedom. By dawn, the road was gone. Snow swallowed every trace of tire marks, every direction. The wind carried the hum of distant engines, too many, too close. Marilyn had been quicker than he thought. Somewhere in town, she was spinning her story, a desperate stepmother whose unstable husband had stolen the children. To the police, that version would sound cleaner. Hale would lead the search, not for a father protecting his own, but for a man on the run. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel, the muscles in his jaw rigid. Emily sat in the back seat, whispering softly to Finn, trying to keep him awake. Rex rested his head on her lap, his breath steady, his warmth a shield. When the road ended at the edge of the forest, Jack turned off the engine. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the cry of wind through the pines. They were far from town now, miles into the foothills where the snow grew deeper and the air thinner. "We'll rest here," he murmured. Emily nodded, her cheeks flushed from the cold, strands of her golden hair plastered to her forehead. He built a small lean-to from a tarp and fallen branches, enough to block the wind but not the cold. Rex curled against Emily, wrapping his body around her legs, the heat from his fur seeping through her coat. Jack sat awake beside them, watching the small fire he had coaxed to life sputter and fade. Hours passed. The storm didn't ease. Emily's breathing grew shallow, her lips pale, her hands trembling even beneath the blankets. Jack pressed a hand against her forehead, too cold. Panic clawed at his chest. He stripped off his own coat, wrapping it around her shoulders, pulling her close against him and Rex. The dog shifted, pressing his weight gently against the girl's side, refusing to move. Jack whispered her name again and again, like a prayer. He had been trained to save men from bullets, not his daughter from the cold. Above the treetops, the faint thrum of helicopter blades cut through the air, the sound of a hunt. Through the trees, beams of light swept across the whitened landscape, ghostly and slow. Marilyn's voice echoed faintly through a loudspeaker, sweet and pleading, the tone of a woman calling lost children home. "Jack, Emily, you're making a mistake. Please come back before it's too late." Her words carried warmth for the cameras, but to Jack they sounded like poison wrapped in honey. He crouched lower, holding the children close, Rex growling quietly beside him. Every instinct screamed that she wouldn't stop until she had them back under her control, or silenced altogether. When the lights faded into the distance, Emily stirred, her voice small and trembling. "Daddy," she whispered. Marilyn said, "Weak children don't deserve to live long." Jack froze, the words slicing through him sharper than the wind. She said, "Mommy made me weak, and she had to fix it." For a moment, the forest spun. He remembered Haley's soft laugh, her voice telling him Emily was gentle, not fragile, that gentleness was strength in its own way. Now, that same child sat trembling in his arms, repeating the twisted creed of the woman he'd led into their home. He felt a sickness rise in him that had nothing to do with the cold. Rex lifted his head suddenly, ears twitching toward a sound deeper in the woods, not the mechanical hum of machines, something closer, deliberate. Jack tensed. Through the trees, flashlights flickered again, moving with purpose. Hale's men were sweeping the forest on foot. Jack could hear their muffled radios, the crunch of boots against ice. He pressed a finger to his lips, meeting Emily's wide eyes. They waited in silence as the voices drew near, then passed just beyond the ridge. Rex didn't move a muscle, his breath controlled, his body still as stone. When the last beam of light vanished, Jack exhaled. "We can't stay," he murmured. "They'll come back." They moved through the forest, guided by faint moonlight breaking through the clouds. Jack carried Finn beneath his coat, Emily's hand locked in his. Each step was heavier than the last, the snow rising past his knees, the cold gnawing at his lungs. But the thought of turning back was unbearable. He remembered a voice from long ago, a woman's steady tone over a radio, calm in the chaos of battle. Maggie Rowan. She had been his comrade once, a child protection investigator before the service. She had a way of cutting through noise, seeing truth where others saw disorder. If anyone would believe him now, it would be her. By midnight, they reached a clearing where the trees opened toward the frozen river. The moonlight glinted off the surface like cracked glass. Jack stopped, breathing hard, scanning the darkness. Somewhere out there, Maggie still lived in a cabin near the county line, a few miles east if he remembered right. It wasn't close, but it was the only place left that meant safety. Emily leaned against him, whispering, "I'm tired, Daddy." He brushed the snow from her hair, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Just a little farther," he said softly. "Rex will help us find the way." The dog barked once, low and sure, as if he understood. As they crossed the riverbank, the wind calmed, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. A father, his children, and a loyal dog moving through the ruins of what had once been home. The snow behind them buried their tracks almost as soon as they were made, erasing proof that they had ever been there at all. But somewhere beyond the horizon, engines stirred again, and spotlights cut faint lines through the falling snow. The hunt had not ended, only deepened. Still, Jack kept walking. The night was long, but he would not let it claim them, not this time. The morning broke gray and soundless across the frozen valley, the kind of dawn that made everything look motionless, even time. Jack had followed the faint memory of a dirt road until the trees thinned and a cabin appeared, its roof heavy with snow, smoke trailing faintly from the chimney. Maggie Rowan opened the door before he could knock. She stood in the doorway, tall and lean, her auburn hair streaked with silver, her eyes sharp yet kind. At 45, she carried the steady confidence of someone who had seen too much and refused to flinch. She had been a military investigator once, a protector of children after the war, and to Jack, she was one of the few people whose words still meant something. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and coffee. Maggie laid Finn on the couch near the fire, her hands moving with quiet precision. She lifted the baby's eyelids, pressed 2 fingers to his neck, then looked at Jack, her expression tightening. "He's showing signs of hypothermia," she murmured, wrapping another blanket around the infant. "And something else. Shallow breathing, slow pulse. It's like he's been under a sedative, not enough to stop him, but enough to dull him." Jack said nothing. Emily sat beside Rex, the dog's head resting on her lap, his amber eyes never leaving her face. Maggie poured hot water into a mug, handing it to Jack, her voice softening. "She's done this before, hasn't she?" He nodded slowly. Later, as the fire crackled, Maggie retrieved her old laptop from a chest by the wall. She worked in silence, the blue light flickering against her face as files opened one after another. Her jaw clenched, and Jack saw in her eyes the same recognition he had felt, that chill of seeing truth take shape. "There it is," she said, turning the screen. It was a record from the Idaho Department of Child Welfare, dated nearly 15 years earlier. Marilyn Hayes, age 21, employed as a caretaker. The case notes described an incident involving a 7-year-old girl hospitalized with hypothermia and bruising. The report had been sealed after the child's family relocated. "She moved here under her maiden name," Maggie said grimly. "Changed towns, changed her story, and Hale, he signed off on her employment years later. They go way back." Jack felt the air thicken around him. He looked toward the children sleeping by the fire, Emily's hand loosely gripping Rex's collar. "We have to stop her," he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of a vow. Maggie's eyes met his. "We will. But we need evidence, not just words. You said she worked somewhere before. A storage facility, cold storage maybe?" Jack nodded. "North of town, near the old freight yard." Maggie's gaze hardened. "Then that's where we start." She grabbed her coat, slung a camera bag over her shoulder, and handed Jack a flashlight. Rex rose to his feet, sensing motion, tail stiff. Outside, the cold bit deep, the snow reflecting light like broken glass. They reached the freight yard by midday. The sky hung low, colorless, the air heavy with the metallic scent of frost. Rex led the way through the drifts, his paws silent against the snow. The warehouse loomed ahead, a long concrete structure half buried by time, its doors chained but brittle from rust. Maggie cut through them with a crowbar, and a gust of stale air rushed out, thick with the smell of ammonia and mold. Inside, rows of freezers lined the walls, their surfaces coated in frost. The sound of dripping water echoed in the dark, and in the far corner, half collapsed beneath debris, was an old metal tub. Jack froze. It was the same size, the same model, the kind he had seen his children in. Emily whimpered softly and clung to his leg. Maggie crouched beside the tub, running her gloved hand along its edge. "Same manufacturer, same design," she said. "She's done this before. She's reenacting something." Jack's stomach turned. The silence around them was suffocating. Then Rex growled, low and deep. He was standing near a stack of crates, pawing at one. Maggie shone her light there and froze. Inside the crate were smaller containers marked with medical symbols, labels faded but readable. Sedatives, some expired, some not. "She never stopped," Maggie whispered. "She just changed her stage." As they stepped outside, Maggie's phone buzzed. She opened it, eyes narrowing at the notification, a motion alert from her remote surveillance access to Jack's old home. She had set it up before leaving town, a habit from her years in the field. The screen showed a frozen frame from the front yard camera. Marilyn standing by the porch, face half turned toward the door, a metal bucket in her hands. Then the next frame, the bucket tilted, water and ice cascading downward. In the corner of the frame, two small figures huddled together, their outlines unmistakable. Maggie didn't speak. She simply turned the screen to Jack. His face went white. "We have her," she said. They didn't have long to celebrate. A distant hum rose through the valley, the low rhythmic chop of rotor blades. Maggie's eyes darted upward. "She's found us." Jack looked around, calculating distance, cover, escape. "She wouldn't come alone," he muttered. And she hadn't. From beyond the tree line, flashes of light flickered, search beams sweeping methodically across the forest. The sound of voices carried through the air, faint but distinct. Hale's voice was among them, calm and authoritative, the voice of a man convinced he was in the right. "Jack Carter, bring the children out now. No one has to get hurt." They moved fast, slipping into the trees. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the forest alive with light and sound. Emily clung to Jack's hand, Finn bundled tight against his chest. Rex ran ahead, guiding them toward higher ground, his instincts so sharp. Maggie followed, one arm wrapped around her camera bag. The helicopter passed overhead, its spotlight slicing through the branches. For a brief second, the beam caught them, white light searing through the cold. A voice shouted, "There!" Then the forest erupted with motion. Maggie pushed Emily behind a fallen log, crouching low. "Stay down!" she hissed. Jack turned, spotting Hale and two deputies breaking through the brush, guns drawn. Behind them, Marilyn emerged from the glare, her hair whipped by the wind, her smile almost serene. "You don't have to run, Jack," she called out. "They'll only make this worse for you." Her voice was honeyed, almost tender, the same tone she had once used to lull the children to sleep. Jack took a step forward, holding his hands up. "You hurt them," he said, his voice shaking. "You nearly killed them." She tilted her head. "I made them stronger." Before Hale could respond, Rex lunged. The dog sprang from the shadows with a ferocity born of loyalty, knocking the sheriff off balance, sending his weapon into the snow. Hale shouted, struggling, while Rex held him pinned, growling. The scene fractured into chaos. Marilyn screaming, one deputy frozen in shock, the other reaching for his radio. Maggie seized the moment, pulling the memory card from her camera and handing it to the second deputy who had just arrived with the rescue team. "Play this," she ordered, "right now." The man hesitated only a second before inserting it into his tablet. The screen flickered to life, the video from Jack's front yard playing in stark, undeniable clarity. The silence that followed was absolute. The footage showed Marilyn's face, her hands, her voice, evidence that no word or denial could undo. Hale froze where he lay, the truth unraveling before him. The rescuers turned toward Marilyn, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to quiet horror. For the first time, her mask cracked. The serene smile vanished, replaced by a flash of rage, then fear. Jack stood still, holding Emily close, the wind whipping snow between them like ash. Maggie stepped forward, her voice steady. "It's over." Morning crept over the mountains of Coldvale like a slow forgiveness. The storm had passed, leaving the valley washed in pale gold, the snow glimmering under a quiet sun. The world looked peaceful again, though the scars beneath that whiteness still lingered. At the edge of town, police cruisers lined the courthouse steps, reporters murmured behind their breath, and for the first time in weeks, justice felt tangible. Marilyn Carter was led out in handcuffs, her face blank, her composure gone. The woman who once whispered lullabies now looked smaller than the winter around her. Sheriff Hale stood nearby, stripped of his badge, the weight of shame visible in the slump of his shoulders. The law had turned on itself, and this time, it listened. Inside the courtroom, the proceedings were brief. Evidence spoke louder than words, the video Maggie had uncovered, the medical reports, the testimonies. There was no plea that could erase the images everyone had seen. When the judge read the charges of child abuse and endangerment, Marilyn's eyes flickered once toward Jack, then to the floor. There was no anger there, no apology, only emptiness. Jack held Emily close, Finn asleep in his arms, while Maggie stood a few steps behind, her expression steady but softened with quiet relief. The verdict came down like the final note of a requiem, not triumphant, not cruel, just inevitable. Outside, the air smelled of pine and frost. Jack stood by the courthouse steps, the children bundled against him. Maggie placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," she said simply. He nodded, his eyes following the trail of tire tracks that led away, disappearing into the woods beyond. For months he had lived in survival, each breath, each step a calculation. Now, for the first time, he didn't know what to do next. The silence was strange, like learning how to live after forgetting. Rex sat beside him, calm and alert, snow dusting the black saddle of his fur. The dog lifted his head slightly, as if sensing that peace had finally come, but remained cautious, as if protecting it. Days later, the hospital was warm, filled with the sterile hum of machines and the faint scent of disinfectant. Emily lay under white sheets, color returning slowly to her cheeks. Finn slept beside her in a bassinet, wrapped in layers of soft cotton. Jack sat between them, the weight of exhaustion and gratitude pressing on him in equal measure. When Emily's eyes opened, her first word was not, "Daddy," but a quiet, trembling question. "She won't hurt us anymore, right?" Jack hesitated, the truth catching in his throat. He leaned forward, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "No," he said gently. "No one will ever hurt you again." The words were simple, but they carried the strength of a promise, one forged in ice, fire, and love. Maggie visited that afternoon, carrying a folder of documents. She looked more rested, though the lines around her eyes had deepened from the long nights. The agency will close the case soon, she told Jack. I've already spoken to Child Protective Services. They're satisfied you've done everything to protect them. What you need now is rest. Her tone softened, almost maternal. You've carried enough weight for one lifetime. Jack smiled faintly. I had help, he said, glancing at Rex, who sat by the hospital window watching the falling snow. Maggie followed his gaze, nodding. He's a good one, she said. They'll want to honor him. A week later, the town gathered at the Coldvale Municipal Square. The storm had left the streets glazed with ice, but people came anyway, drawn by the story that had shaken their quiet valley. A podium stood near the steps of the courthouse, a banner fluttering above it, recognition ceremony for heroic service. Rex stood at attention beside Jack, wearing a new black collar polished with silver. When the mayor, a round middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped forward and read the citation, his voice carried warmth through the cold air. For extraordinary bravery, loyalty, and service in protecting the innocent, the town of Coldvale recognizes Rex Carter as an honorary canine hero. The applause that followed was soft at first, then grew louder, echoing through the square like sunlight breaking through cloud. Emily clapped her small hands, her laughter ringing clearer than it had in months. Maggie stood among the crowd, smiling quietly. Jack accepted the framed certificate on Rex's behalf, kneeling to place a gentle hand on the dog's head. Rex leaned into the touch, his tail brushing the snow, eyes bright with a silent understanding. The ceremony was brief, but it meant everything. For once, Coldvale was not haunted by whispers, but united by something simple: gratitude. That night, after the crowd had gone and the lights along Main Street had dimmed, Jack drove back to the house. It stood still beneath the moon, its roof heavy with new snow, its windows dark but no longer menacing. Inside, warmth returned, a fire burning, the soft scent of cocoa filling the air. Maggie stayed for dinner, her laughter mixing easily with Emily's. She helped Jack with paperwork afterward, patient and thorough, refusing any thanks. You don't owe me, she said. We both just did what needed doing. Still, when she left, she paused at the door, looking back. You're not alone anymore, Jack. Remember that. Later, when the house grew quiet and the children slept, Jack sat by the fire, watching Rex doze near the hearth. The dog twitched occasionally in his sleep, as if chasing ghosts only he could see. Jack reached down, scratching behind his ears, whispering, "We made it, buddy." Outside, snow drifted past the windows, but it no longer looked cruel, only peaceful, as if the town itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Before bed, Emily padded softly into Sunny, the living room, rubbing her eyes, her voice a whisper. "Daddy," she said, "can I say goodnight to Rex?" He nodded, watching as she knelt beside the dog, placing her tiny hand on his head. The firelight caught in her hair, turning it to gold. "You're our hero," she said, her words trembling with sincerity. Rex opened his eyes briefly, pressing his nose to her palm before resting his head again. Jack stood nearby, the sight filling the hollow inside him with something he hadn't felt since Haley's passing. Peace. He looked around the room, the toys by the hearth, the quiet hum of the heater, the slow, steady breathing of his children, and understood that after everything, they had come full circle. Pain had stripped them down, but love had rebuilt what was left. As he turned off the lamp, the fire's last glow flickered across Rex's fur, the light fading gently into warmth. In that fragile, perfect stillness, Jack finally allowed himself to believe that winter could be kind again. Sometimes, the quietest acts of love are the ones that save us. They rarely make the news, and no one builds statues for them, yet they shape the world in ways we may never see. A loyal heart, a father's courage, a simple choice to be kind when it's hardest. These are the things that hold the cold away. Somewhere tonight, someone is standing between darkness and light, not for glory, but because compassion still matters. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need a little hope. Leave a comment, tell us what it made you feel, and subscribe to be part of a place that still believes in goodness. May God bless you and all those who carry quiet courage in their hearts.